Thanks for being back on the Body Pod round 2 this year.
We're back.
We're back. There was so much to discuss. We barely got, I think, half of it covered, Laura, last time.
Yeah.
So we had to have you on for a part 2. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us this morning. This is so exciting. I feel like today what I really want to cover that we haven't touched on, and I'm just curious about a lot of your opinions, and I have to just start by saying, I know we've talked a few times in the last couple of months, and I love your take. It makes me feel so much better anytime I get off the phone with you because I'm like, okay, there isn't just one answer or there isn't just one right person in the menopause space right now. It is a bloodbath of this ongoing disproving this theory, disproving this person, constant war where it's confusing for people in the industry like myself, but it's also twice as confusing and disheartening for Gen Pop. I mean, I always say it feels like we're in this day of information overload, which is a great thing, but it also comes, it's a double-edged sword because then women are flip-flopping all the time and not feeling like they can trust anything that is shared with them, when in reality, I want to break down some of those barriers of, if we pull back and look, it really isn't that much to be scared of, I would say. And there's really not specific, there's not a lot of, you are doing this wrong and you're going to mess up your, fitness and your muscle gains and your nutrition, because there are so many different variations. So let's start there with, where do you see I guess in the menopause space, if we look at let's start with nutrition. If we look at nutrition and let's cover maybe the fasted versus fed, massive debate here. Is there a camp that is clearly right 100% of the time, or are there different variations?
Can we rewind just a second for what you said? And I wanted to say this because one, thanks for having me on. And I say that of like, I get to come talk to some girlfriends. And because the space is so sad right now. And I will tell you, even as someone that's been in the space for a really long time, it's discouraging for everyone, and it's hard. Oftentimes I think of, no, I don't want to be in this space because it's so combative, when I then take a step back and say, research is hard enough as it is. And being a midlife woman is even harder. So why are we then making it worse? And I say that because I want my intentions to be clear. I have nothing I'm selling. And at the heart of everything that I do is to try and help others, particularly women, based on science. The hard part with that, and I wanted to preface your question, is one, as a scientist, we always have hypotheses, but I have learned and know that hypotheses are hypotheses, and you have to let the data drive that, meaning that we are adaptable. Like, the things I believe now are different based on evidence that we've gathered over time. And so that's important too. Like, if I am still saying the same things in 10 years, it means that I'm stagnant. And I say that for me personally. Like, I know then that means I've not filtrated new data. The other thing is, as a scientist, it's really hard to just take one paper and give your opinion. There's one study. You really have to collectively take a lot of research and then share that collective opinion. And I think that's where things have gotten cloudy, of like, my view of the data and the story that I tell might be slightly different based on the same papers, not because I'm interpreting the data different, but maybe my viewpoint on a mechanism is different or based on other papers and knowledge. And so I actually think that's so cool. That means that there is space for everyone. We need all of the researchers and practitioners and people in this space to move the needle. We need to be working together. And if we have difference of opinions, I think that's awesome because then that makes me step back and say, oh, should I ask the question different? Should I look at the data different? And I wanted to say that because the this conversation will be about my opinion. But I will say at this point in my career, I'd like to say I've published over 200 papers. And I say that not because, like, oh, look at me, but because there's a lot of integrated knowledge that I take to give my opinion. And it might be slightly different. And I would love to hear that. Let's have a conversation about, okay, well, what are the needs? What are the differences of opinions? Because then that can make us all better. And so at that same time, I really love to give some translation. And I know that's what we're going to talk about of, okay, well, what do we tell the women? It is so fucking confusing,
Yeah.
even people in the space. We don't need any more confusion. And so I don't have all of the answers, but I know that's what we talked about. Like, hopefully we'll give some dialed down answers. And so your question was about nutrition. And I think the most important thing is that regardless of what data says, every individual, male or female, responds differently. And you can see that in individual data points, and then we present average data. And so I say that because a lot of times people are like, well, oh, I do fasted training and it works great. Okay. A lot of the work suggests that that's probably not the most effective. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. A lot of things go into that. And maybe we can talk through some specifics, but I just that everything has an individual response that arguably is more important than the evidence.
Mic drop.
I
I
know.
mean, Abby, this is why I love you. And I just had a podcast with Dr. Mike Ormsby and all of these big people and everyone in this space. Like your reputation is the same through and through. And that's the beautiful part about it is you have this gift to be able to just make it like I'm telling you, I feel like you would be like my mentor or where I could go to you. And every time I would have be confused, I could get off the phone and be like, the world is good. Like
Mhm.
this is all good because you have an incredible way of just sharing. You know what? Does science, is there something to disprove pretty much most research topics?
Well, why do we have to disprove it? I mean, it's more about let's continue to see if that's still the question we should be answering. And is it the same evidence that we're being given? And so, again, I love the research because there's always more questions to be asked,
Mhm.
even if you
Mhm.
ask the same question. Um, so I think that's part of the problem. It's not about disproving. It's about using evidence to inform and adapt and impact. And
Mhm.
that's the way we should look at it. And not one should person should be right or wrong. I do think sometimes even as scientists we get so excited and maybe overstate or misinterpret, but it still should be one viewpoint and a culmination of even application. Like the way I do it is probably not the way that you do it, and it's still okay. It's still
Mhm.
evidence based, and so that not disprove, but the ability to adapt and apply evidence in a variable
That's
way.
such an important point, I think, that you bring up that regardless of the evidence or regardless of what we're being told, we have to be self-aware and body aware and is that helping me? Is that working for me? And
Which is, I
right?
think, one of the most important takeaways that we can tell women and men,
Mhm.
especially in the US. I know, not everyone is in the US, but in general, we have to be owners of our
Mhm.
health and our body, and only you know how you respond. So we need to teach people how what that feels like, and then how to adapt, and if it's not working or it is working, because that's you. The only
Mhm.
sample that matters is
Because
you.
if something is working for 10 people in your life, that doesn't mean it's gonna work for you, and that's one thing I feel like I'm really learning too, to always come back to, "Okay, but what feels good inside my body?"
And it varies, and I think that's where the hang up comes from of in midlife and perimenopause of what did work for
Mhm.
you for so long is now not working. And it's not just hormones. And I think that's what too, if there's not one simple solution, if I take hormones, it's going to now all respond the same. It's so many levels. And so I think that's part of where the confusion comes from. And in this space, there's even more variables. So yes, maybe it was working and now it's not, and that's a valid response. And a woman needs to be able to say, like, well, one, do I need help? What do I do? And if it's still not working, like, those are all the things that I think research can inform, but it's still that practice that based on the individual.
Yes, and can we really drive home that point? Because I try this in my groups and I get hit up like nonstop every day, all day, every day about, okay, but I don't feel like I can, eat in the morning and then then don't.
Mhm.
Or I feel really crappy when I get up if I don't have this. Okay, so then keep doing that. If it's working, it doesn't matter. There's not one way. And even if like just sticking with the fasted versus fed, are either of these like going to completely derail your health journey if you do one or the other? Or is it really, well, if it works for you, great. None of these are like gonna completely throw you off where you're not getting any results, and this is why.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. And I think this is where it also is about optimization. Meaning, first and foremost, like my goal is for women to be active and feel good and improve their health. And sometimes the only way a woman is going to exercise, and I would say the same for a man, but I do think male metabolism is a bit more resilient. I'll probably get haters for that. I'll come back to that. But meaning, it's not about male female differences. It's about there's a different mental and physical load on a female body, environmental, whatever it may be, mental. And I just need them to train, exercise, move, and feel better. And sometimes that means not eating before they exercise. Sometimes that means eating before the exercise. If I take that and say, all right, in my lab, we've specifically looked at nutrient timing, what to eat around exercise, which leveraged largely male data. And we saw a gap that said, we actually don't know. And we know in women, and there are some metabolic differences. So let's go look at that. Let's look at different types of food. Let's look at pre and post. And the data has shown us that eating protein, 25 grams of a scoop of protein before exercise, increases energy expenditure, increases fat oxidation. That does not mean fat loss always. And it does seem to allow for a greater exercise volume, which indirectly might support some better lean mass, body comp changes, and some strength. I will tell you, I exercise, and often I don't eat before I exercise. And I say that of we are the sum of our collective action. Meaning, if I really wanted to modify body composition, I wanted to be kick-ass strong, and that was my goal, then I would dial that in and probably focus on my nutrient timing prior to, because I know that there's evidence behind it. But in reality, I don't care about a couple extra 100 calories that I'm going to burn because I don't have time to eat that much anyways. And so, like, it really does depend and how we interpret the data. Now, if I had a woman who was fasting, intermittent fasting, and having a problem with low metabolism and weight gain, then I might say, hey, this is maybe a strategy to try. See how you feel. Do it consistently. It might increase energy expenditure. It might help with some metabolic flexibility. And let's try it. Will it work? I don't know. Every woman is different. And it also depends on their previous history. How
Mhm.
many times have they dieted? How, adaptive are their mitochondria? How much exercise were they doing? How much sleep were they getting? So it's hard to give those broad recommendations when there's so many individual factors.
Ugh, this is so good. Okay, so moving
So
on.
good or so confusing, I
No,
don't know.
No,
no.
because this is what I try to tell, like in all of my groups. If you're coming in here looking for one answer, you've probably come to the wrong place because I've never had, it's like going to a physician and the physician saying there's one antidepressant that works for everyone.
Mhm.
Oh, it doesn't work for you? Sorry, you're screwed. Good luck with your depression and anxiety. There are differences that work for
Mhm.
everyone, and the empowering of females to say, okay, use myself as an example. Let me try fasted training for, a couple of months. How did I feel? How did I recover? How are my lifts? How is my sleep? Does it matter? Maybe some people are like, I can do fine on both. It doesn't really matter because I
Mhm.
do both as well and not intentionally. If I get up and I'm like, shit, I have a call in 45 minutes, I'm running downstairs and I get on my bike for a minute. Versus most of the time, if I get up early and I will eat before I go to the gym and I'm training clients and I'm training myself. And I can't imagine doing these really high, intense strength training sessions with no food in. Even if I had a great meal the night before, but now it's 9 o'clock and I'm freaking starving. So there's nuances and answers, I guess, for everyone. So if we're looking at cardio and midlife, and you kind of touched on fat oxidation, and we know that the low, slower cardio is going to burn more fat for most women, and then the higher is going to pull in more carbohydrate. If someone isn't as flexible with that, I mean, there are metabolically inflexible women.
Mhm.
What do we do with that? A, how would you know if you are not flexible? And B, what do we do about it?
Yeah, that's a big question. I would say um, you probably wouldn't know if you're metabolically inflexible. We measure it in the lab with some indirect calorimetry. I would say maybe, a sign of metabolic inflexibility is if you are doing exercise and keeping your diet the same and gaining weight. Like if you actually have some of those controls and you're not overeating, then that could be a sign of metabolic inflexibility, or some increased in blood markers like lipid markers, cholesterol, etc. But by even after you've taken care of some diet and exercise. Um, but that's so nuanced. What I would say based on the data is, and again, any exercise is good exercise. But if someone asked me, like, I'm having some of these increases in body fat, I'm doing all the same things and I'm not seeing responses, I would say, are you doing some high intensity training, high intensity interval training first, if metabolism is something that I'm looking at? And because there is good data that suggests that although you are burning more carbohydrate during the exercise, and actually not a lot of calories during the exercise, if you're truly doing high intensity interval training, there's a greater metabolic demand after exercise. There's greater energy expenditure and greater fat oxidation. That still does not make us more metabolically flexible, but it does stimulate our mitochondria for those changes in a good way, like mitochondrial health. Um, but that makes us more kind of adaptive, which is a part of exercise. That's actually a good thing. But here's the kicker, that's where some of this nutrition comes in. If we fast and do exercise, that actually makes your mitochondria really efficient, which is good, meaning you'll burn fewer calories, you'll be more efficient, you'll be able to do that exercise and not feel tired. We want that for exercise. We don't want that if our goal is weight loss. And that's where some of the changes come in. Of if you've been an avid exerciser your whole life, particularly aerobic exercise, I'll raise my hand as a former collegiate distance runner. But what if I get to a phase in my life where I don't want to be so damn efficient? Meaning, like, I could go all day and not eat and be fine. That is not a good spot to be in. Then we want to make it more inflexible, not inflexible, less efficient. And that's where some of that, like protein before exercise, high intensity interval training, resistance training, kind of tapping into and making our body use things and maximize some of those mitochondrial use, like use the mitochondria in a way it's not used to, can make us more inefficient, which is great for body composition.
So, okay, and this changes this as we get into this peri postmenopause phase of life.
The inflexibility, we have some early data. I would say not everybody, but it does. And we're doing a study right now to look at some more of those mechanisms of the inflexibility. Showed some early data in that moderate intensity exercise, that perimenopausal women, some, are more inflexible, meaning they are burning more carbs than fat,
Mm.
which then over time could hinder their ability to utilize fat and might suggest that supporting that weight gain. So then the question is, well, how do we make them more inflexible? And there's, some longer or kind of previous data, not in women, but more in like triathletes and this idea of metabolic flexibility. And if you have someone that's burning mostly carbs when they should be burning fat, um, adding some protein and some amino acid kind of blunts that, opposed to carbohydrate. It will allow us to utilize amino acids and or mostly fat to make us more flexible. And that is twofold. One, we're able to use fat, but it also then allows us to spare some muscle glycogen, which will allow us to exercise longer, harder without kind of bonking or, maximizing our glycogen stores.
Okay, so when we have and this okay, this is the next outside of the flexibility and fat substrate or the substrate that we're burning.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
we go back to cardio in general and we look at women at this time of life, I don't know a hell of a lot of women that have oodles of time with nothing to do.
Mhm.
This is the
Mhm.
busiest time. I mean, Laura has an infant and I have kids off at college and running. Like there's not enough hours in the day for most women. So then they're coming in and they're like, "Okay, how do I maximize the short amount of time that I have?" I mean, I all the time get in trouble for having workouts that are 60 minutes. And women, rightfully so, women are like, I have 30 minutes, Haley. Okay, so let's give some 30-minute options. So when we look at zone 2 and even HIIT, and we look at those different types of cardio training, we know, correct me if I'm wrong, that to increase, because there's a lot of talk about VO2 max and
Mhm.
increasing this, that you have to do a heck of a lot of hours in zone 2 to change the VO2 max opposed to maybe these shorter sessions. Or how does that play into a time frame of women that are time crunched, but and then they're hearing like, okay, well, do I do zone 2? Do I not? Does time come into the factor of what you're getting out of it?
100%. And I mean, it absolutely comes into factor, and partly why we focus on some of these higher intensity, shorter time requirements, not necessarily because they're better, but in general, most of us don't exercise and don't have enough time to exercise. And so the best way I like to describe it is if we wanted aerobic changes to our VO2 max, which is a really important conversation no one's having because we see such big changes to our heart health as we age. It's not about fat and always muscle. Our heart health really matters. And if I wanted to see changes in my VO2 max, and I did an aerobic exercise, program, it would take about 12 weeks if done right.
Mhm.
Whereas we can see changes in VO2 max from things like high intensity interval training or higher training in as little as 2 to 3 weeks.
Wow.
And so I say that of if our goal is improving cardiovascular fitness, you can do that in a shorter period of time and it's higher intensity. And so that's very feasible. It also takes a mental, like I got to get myself amped up for those high intensity workouts. But it's also important too, I think, one of the biggest complaints women have is joint pain and muscle pain and injury.
Mhm.
And so some of this high intensity training is lower volume. It is lower volume, which can have lower stress on the body and the joints and prevent some of those things or be maybe a little bit easier because it's shorter. So there's a lot of considerations. And one thing I'll say is like, I love long distance running. My body doesn't, but my brain does. And so, but I often have to say, okay, instead of just going for a run, I need to do some high intensity training, or I only have 20 minutes, even though my brain is, like, like that feeling you get used to and you just feel totally spent when you're done. And that's the only thing that tells you you had a good workout. That's
Yeah.
totally not true. Like it's more of that consistency and working some other muscles and motor unit recruitment. So yes, that shorter period of time is very effective for improving cardiovascular health in such a short period of time, which is really
This
valuable.
is good news for us.
Well, you guys already knew this. I think though,
But for all the
it's
women out there
sometimes,
who don't have time,
well,
this is
yeah,
great
and you
news.
probably have seen this exercise snacking literature is pretty cool too. I haven't bought into that because I'm such a sweaty sweater. Like
Me
if I
too.
go exercise for 10 minutes, if I talk about exercise, I'll start sweating. Um, but like you could do 10 minutes and then do later another 10 minutes and bam, that's great. It's consistency that, whatever makes you consistent can be really valuable.
Yes, and if we look at the recovery penalty that HIIT can have,
Mhm.
so it has a higher recovery penalty and time to. This also comes into the conversation of how you're planning out your week,
Yeah.
and people
Mhm.
want to know, you know, I do this many strength, I do this many cardio, and it's like, okay, well, how are you recovering? And everyone kind of hears that. They're like, yeah, 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 sleep recovery, got it. I hear it all the time. I know it's important. But that comes into play of maybe not wanting to smash yourself every day.
Mhm.
And so if you get on there and you have 30 minutes and the zone 2 is feeling great today and you don't feel like you can smash it, I take my workouts, and this doesn't work well for maybe the type A person that likes to have it all
Mhm.
structured every single
Mhm.
day. And I'm not type A, so this doesn't bother me, but I have a lot of clients and, friends, and I know a lot of people are. But this is where I will get on my bike in the basement, and some days for no reason at all. Some days I'll know because I've had crappy sleep or I've been super stressed or I didn't eat well the day before and I'm just feeling zonked. But other days, I get on there and I'm ready to rev it up, and it's just not happening. And so I'm like, okay, cool. The most important thing is that I'm doing this. So I'm going to do it for 30 my intended time, but I'm just going to go low duration today and it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
And that is really like, it doesn't matter what Haley says or what her program says or what, anyone says of whatever program you're doing. You need to be able to adjust it and trust yourself enough to know that this is not making or breaking your fitness journey on any given day.
Yeah.
No, 100%. Like, and it goes back to our goal. So I had two thoughts when you were talking. Like, any exercise is good exercise, and I think that needs to be emphasized
Mhm.
because it's also not for like we shouldn't just be exercising for weight loss. We're exercising for heart health and for mental health. There's a lot of reasons and benefit we get from that. It impacts our sleep. And so I think the problem comes, and I'll use myself as an example. I love high intensity work. And if someone said, go do high intensity work every day, I would say, I will find more hours to do it because that's the challenge you gave me. But if I went from every day of like, if I went with your method, Haley, I would be like, every day I'm just going to do zone 2 because I'm really fucking tired, especially at this phase in my, in my,
Exactly.
and so it's like, I say that first you have to identify what you need, hire
Mhm.
someone to say like, hey, here's my program, but hey, Haley, I'm checking in. I actually don't feel great today. What do you think? I'm going to do zone 2 today. And then
Yeah.
you would say, hey, Abbie, it's Thursday. How are you feeling? You might not feel great, but let's just do a little, like, just to keep me on task.
Yeah.
But it really comes down to our goals. And you hit on recovery, which it brings back to the nutrition conversation.
Mhm.
If you are a person that's doing high intensity work a lot and heavy resistance training, and you are doing fasted exercise and you're under fueling and you are the person that goes like, I want to do all the things for the benefit, that's really when you have to optimize nutrition and dial in. Like if you are sore for multiple days, if you are not recovering, if you are fatigued, those are the things that I would come back and say, okay, let's take a closer look. Are we optimizing nutrition before, during, and or after?
Mhm.
How much do you have any planned recovery? Women do a terrible job of letting ourselves recover. I'm one of the worst of like, why would I recover? Like I need that time. And so but I think it goes back to there's so many different approaches, but it's those times in your body. If you are tired every day, is it because you're doing too much? Is it because you're doing too little? Is it because like there's a lot of reasons for that and making it adaptable. There are a lot of ways to get to the same point. And the other thing, like I totally see as a luxury for me and for you guys, is that we've trained for a long period of time.
Mhm.
Like I have
Mhm.
trained. I was a former collegiate athlete. It's part of my day to day. I'm unhappy and not a nice person when I don't exercise. Which just means that like I actually can afford, like if I don't exercise for a few days, it doesn't impact me because I have this very chronic base of training. And I
Mhm.
think that's also important to realize, like your training age also impacts that. Like it more motivation for women to prioritize fitness, of like that little bit every day hugely makes a difference for our long-term health and quality of life. It doesn't have to be massive volume. It could be those 30 minutes every day or most days of the week. And it doesn't have to be that high intensity exercise every day.
Hmm. So, all right, let's move on to some supplements. And I know you were just, you have done a lot, you're on a lot of the creatine uh, journals and have done a bunch of podcasts on it for other podcast hosts as well. So, if we look at creatine, I think most women now, it's really rare that I ever hear of somebody say, what's creatine? Or I'm not taking,
Yeah.
most women are invested in the conversation now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But what do we get from creatine outside of the recovery and the, muscle and fitness aspects? What other benefits are there for women specifically, and does that change as we age?
It's a really good question. And I also kind of think it's funny that it's such a big topic now, because creatine has been around for a long time. And yeah, I was recently in Germany presenting on some creatine, and my very first scientific publication back in 2007 was creatine in women.
No way.
What?
Yeah,
Wow.
now
Wow.
we didn't control for menstrual cycle, but it's just funny to see, and it's great of like, okay, yes, women need some support too, but I will be the first to tell you, creatine would not be like the first supplement I would tell a midlife woman to take. And I can,
Really?
yeah, I mean, I can tell you which one I would, but let's answer your creatine
Yes, but
question.
then I want to know that answer too.
I it does have potential for benefit. Will everyone in their midlife female phase see a benefit? Maybe not. But it's one of those things that has such a low risk
Mm.
profile of it and a high potential of, if you take 5 grams of creatine a day in your midlife, you might see some benefits on your exercise. You might see benefits on your recovery. At that low dose, it'll take 3 to 4 weeks to see any effect. Which is where, if you take a higher dose, like the loading dose, 20 grams a day in 5 gram doses, 5 grams, 4 times a day, you might see those effects faster. And sometimes that's what I recommend of, hey, women, if you want to see if this works, go take 20 grams for a week. Do you see any difference? If not, okay, well, maybe give it a try. Are there any negative side effects? Like some of the impacts that I think are beneficial do take a little bit longer,
Uh-huh.
like bone. A woman is really not going to see an impact on bone. And the only really effect we see with bone is when you combine it with resistance training. And so, unless you're getting repeat bone mineral density scans, it still takes, at least a whole year to make new bone.
Yeah.
Same thing with muscle. It's not like creatine is going to make you massively strong and a lot more muscle rapidly. It's kind of that over time.
Mhm.
To me, some of the interesting benefits come more from the brain side. And I'll tell you, the science is still growing here. But there's enough growing literature that I feel like that's where, one, we are our own researcher or kind of subject. So the brain benefit related to cognition and really shows is, if you are kind of cognitively impacted negatively, if you have some sort of cognitive dysfunction, you might see a benefit. And so then, you think about most midlife women, they usually aren't sleeping great. There's massive changes in the brain related to, thought process. And then we see changes, things with anxiety and depression. There's growing data that shows creatine with antidepressants helps that have an impact. And so it's one of those things of like, I don't know about you ladies, but at this phase in my life, I will do anything to help my brain work like it used to. Um,
Anything.
well, except for sleep more, right? Who
Yeah.
has time for that? um, and so that, what I see is that like slightly higher dose, that 10 grams a day, may have some benefit on brain. And that I like to call it like that neural drive. And what's the risk? Will it work? We need stronger data, definitely. But it has a pretty low risk. And then if you have women that are eating mostly plants, that they will see a even better benefit. Or a woman that isn't sleeping, who has an infant, is up repeatedly throughout the day, or out the night. So there's a lot of potential benefit that would also work for men, but the environment is slightly different for women. Even some of the physiological brain changes, and like I said, the being up all night, those things would maybe be more advantageous.
So if you're loading at 20 grams, there's not any negative, well, the side effect could be you could retain more water, which women freak out about. But what is the realistic weight gain when you start creatine?
So if you are loading,
Mhm.
and this is pretty consistent in the literature, of most women don't gain a lot of weight. We're talking about a half a pound to a pound. And I actually think if you gain weight, it actually tells me that you are more of a responder. It's a good thing,
Mm.
because really
Oh.
it's pulling water into the cell. And I mean, you guys know this, but when you pull water into the cell, your muscles also look good.
Yeah.
But you may gain a little bit of water weight, but to me that actually says it's saturating your intramuscular creatine stores, and that usually dissipates within a few days after, because things like kind of settle. And then we have seen, if that happens around the menstrual cycle, like if you are someone that's still menstruating, that luteal phase, we tend to have a little bit more fluid extracellularly, and creatine can maybe, you might see even a bigger impact on that cellular hydration fluid shift again, which is not a bad thing. Now, if you are going to an event and you don't want to, I don't know, if you've never taken creatine and you don't want to be a little extra puffy, or those days we feel like a little
Mhm.
soft, I wouldn't tell you to creatine load right before you have to go look great in a tight dress, because you just don't know.
Yeah.
But otherwise, like normally it will be pretty minimal, but there are responders and non-responders. That's why I put that qualification. If some women say I have never had an effect, and other women are like, oh my gosh, I feel so swollen, I'm thinking, well, what did you take it with? Or good for you. That means your muscle is very much responding. And so I think those are the things of like, well, what do you want it to do? Like, or what effect, do you want to have that response? Is it not something you like and you don't want the benefits? Well, great. Well, then don't take it.
Mhm.
Good point.
So what is the
Yeah,
supplement?
Okay. I mean,
exactly.
my first one would probably be like an omega-3,
Yes, I'm doing
because
that.
it's impossible to get omega-3 in our diet consistently,
Mhm.
and it has so much benefit on every cell in the body. So, I mean, I want my hair, skin, and nails to look good. Trying to keep
Yeah.
up with you ladies. And so omega-3 would be number one. And then, I mean, vitamin D would be a close second.
Oh.
Again, really hard to get in the diet and very much related to muscle and bone and recovery and so many things. And then I would say number three would be magnesium, especially in our midlife, of like our body just doesn't, we're not able to utilize it the same, and it's related to a lot of cellular function. And so those would be my top three. I think creatine definitely has a role, but probably wouldn't be the first thing I would start with.
I feel so good right now because I'm
I
taking
know.
all of those things, and that's actually the only thing. I feel like I could really benefit from a multivitamin right now because my life is so busy that half of the time I'm waking up in the middle of the night hungry because I'm not trying to eat
Hmm.
over the last, like, couple months. I'm just so busy that I don't even have time to sit down, and it's terrible. That's not a badge of honor by any means.
Yep.
It just is what it is, and, there's certain phases where
Yep.
this
Hmm.
happens in life, and we do have these periods of time that are just really hard, and so supplements like this can really help, and I don't eat enough fish. I grew up, in Utah, and I think my family grew up with, like, the frozen fish sticks at the supermarket. So I was like, "Fish, gross." And then it wasn't until I started traveling coastal, to one side or the other, where I realized that fish was actually good. So an omega-3 is a completely non-negotiable for me. Um, so as the new if we go back to, impacts of sleep and recovery on the brain in perimenopause. Now, I just learned that the brain is changing in perimenopause. which I didn't know. I thought, okay, yeah, there's these changes, post menopause, but the brain is changing even during our menstrual cycle. Is that right?
Yeah, so and I am not a brain researcher, so hopefully you have a brain expert, but I will say there are changes across the menstrual cycle, absolutely. And then we see pretty big changes in perimenopause. But the bright side is those tend to then level off and come back to normal into postmenopause,
Oh, good.
Mhm.
which then even speaks to the need and the clearing of the bullshit for this phase in life of we actually really need to help women in this phase because it is so variable
Mhm.
and there's greater light ahead. We actually have some good data in menopause or into postmenopause, but it's that midlife that we still don't have a lot of questions answered.
Mhm. Yeah,
And how does the
agreed.
brain change? I don't, like we could get into some of that, but it is, I would make a broad statement that many women have symptoms related to anxiety, depression, sleep, so many things that they think are related to their life, which obviously impacts it, but are largely related to the hormonal changes that are happening with just that rapid fluctuation. And I say that like those, you should go ask a professional and say, here's how I'm feeling. If they say, oh, it's your mental health only, like say like, well, there's, no one asks you about your menstrual cycle status. It's like getting more insight.
What
Yeah.
about brain
Yeah.
fog and memory?
Oh yeah, I mean brain fog is the term everyone uses and I'm sure I mean like postpartum is the very similar brain fog and if you can imagine the changes in hormones,
Mhm.
it's a very similar brain fog that happens in perimenopause. Like how do you define brain fog? I mean, I think we all experience it slightly different, but it goes back like actually I think when we talk about supplements, when we talk about things like creatine, but also nootropics, that I see is a big growing field because of the brain fog. And I don't think this is just specific to women. I think it's also on the heels of
Mm.
COVID. The best way I like to describe it, like in my brain, I have probably 20 tabs open.
Mhm.
And I used to be able to like do a tab and close it. And now I'm like, oh, there's a tab. No, I got to do that tab. And I forgot to go back to that tab. And that piece of like, yeah, then where do I go? My brain is very foggy. How do I actually execute that mental task? And there are some dietary supplements that help with that.
That is such a good way of explaining it, like putting a name to it. Okay, and what are the supplements that help the most with that, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, we'll sleep. But in reality, I'm a total hypocrite because I just don't have time to sleep. In my body, I wake up at like 4:30, I'm ready to go. Like that is and so sleep helps the most. But then like I personally like there's some good data around citicoline, phosphatidylserine, rhodiola, um, schisandra extract. There's a few
Mhm.
that I feel like is one of those things. Is there great data? No, which is why I hesitate. Like this is my own personal. But there's a blend of things, or like trying things is pretty low risk for the impact that it has for me. Of like the ability to then execute a task is really helpful with a kind of a minimal risk. So it probably won't help for everyone. But for instance, a lot of people reach for caffeine.
Uh-huh.
I always say caffeine makes my squirrels in my brain just run faster. I need something to like calm them down. And so that's where some of the nootropics come in. I'm sure I missed some, but those are like the top of my list right now.
That's great. So if we look at um fitness mistakes. Now what we've said, there's everything can apply to
Yeah.
anyone. But are there certain things that women can do that will hinder progress with strength, getting more strength or changing body composition if we circle back to that conversation?
Yes. So there's always a caveat of like some people's bodies are more resilient than mine. But I think the number one thing that I see with most women is the fasting and the under fueling. And so I would say, can people do that? Maybe. I would say it would be harder based on the effects and some of the data that we have of just kind of fasting chronically. That doesn't mean like a single point in time, but under fueling will hinder strength, recovery, soreness, and body composition.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's some caveats to that but I would say that would be a key thing. And then um, the other thing that I think is a little bit self-explanatory, but is if you go really hard and then you have to take the time off because you're so under recovered, meaning having that consistency is a really good starting point. And that's different for everyone of like, what is it that you can do that can fit it in? And maybe like, I feel like we give women such a hard time of you don't have to do high intensity training and you don't have to do it one way, just start. And
Mhm.
then if you're not seeing changes, adapt. But what works for you, like get that into your habit and your daily routine is really like the best starting point.
Yeah, and that's what I see the most is it's like, okay, take out everything that or people may see somebody like you who was a collegiate athlete,
Former,
or
I do it all. I'm just trying to keep up one day at a time.
or look at like, okay, people ask, well, Haley, what are you doing in the week? Consistency and then duration in the exercise and then effort intensity. Like you
I
can't
like
do
that.
all of it at once because if you can't recover and the women that like to, I feel smashed. I couldn't move for 2 days. You just lost 2 days in the gym
Yeah.
that you could have done. I mean, and sometimes that will happen when you're new at something, but the goal is always to just get enough adaptation where you're improving, but you're not under fueling, under recovering, you know, getting and that's where we see this I guess lapse in performance and or muscle overall muscle gain in a female that's looking at why do I not change? Why am I not changing? There's non-responders and then there's also well, what is happening in your life that maybe is not helping you with
Yeah, and
that.
to me this is a big debate right now too of like I don't even know what the debate is. The takeaway about female muscle and how it responds. And what we know is that any muscle will respond if you give it an appropriate stimulus. And the stimulus varies based on the person, the individual. What's the stimulus it's used to? There's no reason for us to believe that women can't respond in a similar way to men. But what we don't know is like we absolutely know estrogen receptors impact muscle tissue and the malleability of it. Do we know specifically how volume and load intensity and how it compares to men? I would say who the fuck cares? Because
Yeah.
like it's not about male female. My view is, well, okay, can we take all of the literature we know about training volume, intensity, etc., and can we apply it the same to women? Sure, maybe, but what about the joint pain? What about some other like components to it? And I think that's where we need a little bit more information. And we are about to start a study looking at resistance training in perimenopause with creatine. And I don't expect the changes in the muscle to be dramatically different than what we would see in a male. But I do anticipate like nutrition to be a bigger conversation. We've done interventions in women before that we haven't seen an increase in muscle. And it's not because of the stimulus, it's because they're under fueling. Like we need to capture the nutrition. And I think it's not just saying like this conversation of lift heavy weights. Well, what's heavy to me might be different for you. And we also want to make sure like you can still, sometimes I'm lifting the exact same weight that I did 2 years ago and my muscle is still fine. Like the lifting heavy just needs to be relative. And that messaging, I would love to get to a point of what is the minimal stimulus that we need for a female muscle. And I'm not sure it's any different than a male. And meaning, like relative. And I think we just need more clarity. The data currently doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean to say like it's not different. Let's explore more. It's more research questions.
So if we're looking at a female that's brand new to the weights room, because there's a lot of women that are brand new, and one of the biggest issues I see is that there's not a good description for training age and ability level, like beginner, intermediate, advanced. Because women will again come into me and they're saying, "Okay, I'm going to buy your advanced strength training," and I'm like, Do you know what that entails? Are you comfortable with the barbell and really low reps? Because if you're doing group fitness class down the street, no shame, not throwing any shade at it at all. That is not if that class is advanced, that doesn't mean you're advanced under really heavy load. So there's not good descriptions because everyone is just like, well, I'm advanced in this, so I must be advanced under strength and load. But if someone's coming into the weights room that's fairly new, what is realistic? Is there a realistic guideline of how much muscle in a year that someone could build if they were following a good program?
Oh, that is a really good question. I'm not sure there's any year-long studies. A lot of times they're a bit shorter. I think from a scientific perspective, something to think about is if you've never lifted weights, the first 6 weeks is all neuromuscular changes, which is really
Mhm.
important, meaning that someone will get really strong really fast. That's not muscle. That's not hypertrophy, like new muscle. That's just your ability of your brain to recruit more of your muscles and you get stronger. So, one, don't be afraid if you are something gets easy, like gradually increasing that load is normal. It's because your body's neuromuscular system is adapting. And then usually after that first 6 weeks or so, and sometimes a little bit earlier, but then you start to see some of those physiological changes to the muscle.
Mhm.
How much to expect? Gosh, everyone's so different
Mhm.
on their ability to put on muscle, but it's not a massive amount. That's the frustrating part. It's really easy to put on fat. It's not easy to put on muscle. But once you have muscle, it's not as hard to maintain. And I think that's also the conversation of when we are talking about resistance training, a lot of it is just maintaining the muscle we have, preventing the loss, and that can happen from a lot of different ways of, it could be higher volume, slightly lower load. It doesn't have to be always ridiculously heavy. So I'm avoiding your question because I don't have an answer, but I would say like, you know um, a few pounds of muscle, depending on the way the program is designed.
Yeah, well, I mean, and if you look at the main maintenance of it, I mean,
Hmm.
for myself as an example, I was deadlifting 25% more 2 years ago, and my back is like, I don't this doesn't work for me anymore.
Mhm.
So
Hmm.
I'm like, "Cool, okay. I'll push on areas that I can push that are safe. A leg press, a leg extension, a hip thrust, but I don't have to deadlift the same I'm deadlifting less
Mhm.
Hmm.
over 2 years, but I have the same amount of muscle mass."
Hmm.
So that's the thing is it gets to a point where it's like you have to be your own guide of a responsibly build into a program regardless of whatever you hear or whatever you want to do right now. You don't get to go from A to Z in 3 months. Doesn't work. Ego's got to come out of it. And I know that's more there's a lot of men with egos, but there's also ego in females that is like, well, no, I can do that, no problem. And it all comes at a risk. It does have to be properly formulated and built up over time. If we look at the bone and we know that bone takes about a year to see changes, which is why no one's getting DEXAs every 3 months. Or, I'll have people come in and be like, okay, well, I'm going to get a DEXA every 3 months. And I'm like, even for muscle, you're not going to see that much of a
Mm-mm.
difference.
Hmm.
So, we want that year. But for osteoporosis, for someone that is kind of falling into that osteopenic realm,
Mhm.
how important and what do we, if we know that it takes a year to really change bone, is that a year of how do you feel about the jumping? Jumping is kind of we have jumping and we have heavy lifting, and jumping is getting more um, spotlight right now.
Hmm.
I mean, jumping's always been around, but it's really getting in the hot seat right now. So, do you have any research, or how do you feel about if somebody were to come in that's osteopenic? What would you do to help them over maybe a year's time where they could improve something?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking, I think one of the worst parts of the environment right now is women are feeling like they have to not have an ego, but like, oh, I do heavy weights, and it puts them at greater risk for injury, not intentionally. Meaning that heavy is all relative. We need to start with where you're at. Sometimes that is body weight, sometimes it's bands, and then just knowing that changes. So The injury piece, I absolutely worry about, of this messaging of yeah, you have to do heavy and that's it. And you have to also go jump. Here's the thing of like the jumping and the heavy lifting. You can also, at this phase in life, we're not trying to increase bone. That's great if you can, but we're really trying to prevent a loss. And by
Mhm.
preventing a loss, you just need to stimulate the muscle and the skeleton. And so that's all relative. If you have someone that has done nothing, please don't go jump. Like that will result in an injury. And there are a lot of women that I know that actually their bones hurt because that's how like osteo, like their bones are degrading. And so you don't go start them with a massive heavy lifting jumping protocol. Um, and so it's all relative. You got to start slow and just realize that any stimulus is good stimulus. And we're not trying to massively increase bone. We're trying to maintain it for longevity. And so, is jumping great? Like I will tell you, I'm the worst jumper. And
Same,
I
Me
wish
too.
I
I
could.
am the worst.
But it hurts my knees. Like I should do a bit more jumping, and I'm someone that trains pretty chronically, but it's still
Mhm.
not something you want to do. Like you have to weigh that risk to benefit ratio. So even for someone like me, if I started to do some plyometrics, I probably would hire someone to say, "Hey, can you like start me off so that I'm not doing that?" And I know what to do, So I'm saying that of like we don't have to do it all. If you don't know, that's why we have professionals
Yeah.
like yourselves, and we do want to prevent injury because I know you guys have had injuries, and that's the
Mhm,
worst. And the older we get, the longer it takes to recover.
mhm.
And so we want to make sure we're helping women, put them in a space that's actually building their bodies up. And jumping is not the place I would start.
Yeah. There's definitely a buildup there, and it comes with a lot of preliminary jumping drills of,
Hmm.
hopping and pogos and different things like that because the tendon and the ligaments are just because
Mhm,
you jumped when you were 20 doesn't mean that you just get to go right into box jumps. Super important as well. Again, the overall theme, regardless of anything that we've talked about today, rep ranges, cardio, nutrition, all of these things. It all is so individual, but there is a buy in process for anything.
mhm,
And really, there's no race to the finish. Like, if we're in this for life and we want to stay injury free, which is already really hard post menopause without estrogen as an anti inflammatory. I mean, we're already, there's things that are just, and just from age and
mhm,
wear and
Hmm.
tear. Our joints hurt. I don't know anyone that, again, maybe a very few percentage of people that don't have any niggles
yeah,
Hmm.
happening. There's always some. So it's like there's build up, do what you can, do something with resistance, do something with cardio. And what's your overall goal? Because if you don't really care about body composition, most women do, but if you don't, does it really matter what you're doing as long as you're lifting some weight and doing some cardio?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is I'll put myself, I feel like we've all made it more confusing, not more confusing on purpose. The goal of you and what you're doing is to make it more simple. But I think all of these voices have made it so hard for women to say, well, what do we do? And I would say, like, if anything, take this as like putting ownership back in yourself. Like you
mhm,
have the ability to do what's best for you and take the time to do that and prioritize yourself. And I continue to say that, and I also remind myself of that, of like how do we continue to prioritize our health, our training, our nutrition. And if something is not responding the way we think it should or we're unhappy about, like don't just be quiet about it. I think that's where, like, do you hire someone to help you? I mean, women are so smart. Like go look at some of your own literature and try those things out. Like I think it's really giving us, we have to take care of ourselves because one, our health, most of the health practitioners don't know how, and our bodies will respond, like mine will respond differently than yours. And so it's really saying, like, hear the voices,
mhm,
but know that they might land differently than you. That doesn't mean you're wrong, and it doesn't mean that they're wrong. It means like everyone's trying, in my mind, doing their best to try and bring light to the
mhm.
space, but it's making it more confusing of like, we start small, like exercise, try and improve your health. Like one thing we don't talk a lot about is eating more fruits and vegetables, like fueling throughout the day. Yes, everyone knows to eat protein, but like there's a lot of other things of like just prioritize eating. I'll remind myself of that. Haley, it sounds like you too.
Yeah.
Like and do some movement, like get some sunshine if you need to. Like I don't know, I think we need to start small and then build up, and then goes back to what you said. What are your goals? Your body is amazing. I mean, that's why I'm in this space. Like it grows humans and then it goes back. And it like you want to build muscle, you can train it to do that. If you don't care and you gain some fat, it does that. And then you can move back. So like this, just knowing like your physiology, like your body is so cool. And I love to play around with it. And sometimes I'm pissed at it. But then you're like, okay, I'm going to use the tools and try it out. Like life is long. Like, let's say it works. Okay, well, I'll tweak it and then we'll do something else.
God, what a great reminder. Our bodies really are amazing.
So cool, especially women. I mean, literally, like who grows humans?
It's such a good point.
Nobody.
Okay. Wait,
nobody else.
Before we go, I have to ask, what are you working on right now that you're excited about?
We have, I think last time I told you about this study, but we have just done some preliminary analyses. We're looking at perimenopause, early and late perimenopausal women, as a follow-up, some nutrient timing of protein versus fasted prior to a bout of high intensity interval training, looking at energy expenditure, fat metabolism using some more invasive measures, and controlling for 30 days of hormones to try and get some more picture of what's happening. And so we have just a handful left to recruit, but I did some preliminary analyses, and 25 grams of protein prior to HIT in perimenopause is increasing calories. We saw about 300 calories versus 100 of exercise alone, post-exercise, and is accelerating like greater fat oxidation post-exercise. No difference during exercise. That makes sense. And so it seems like such a minor finding, but for me, we've now shown 3 times that this approach is impacting some metabolism, which then sets the foundation for, one, it's very feasible. Like I know for me, it's a good reminder that like, yeah, if you want a little bit of a better benefit, have some protein beforehand. That's an easy fix. But then what we're waiting on some of the analysis is how are those hormones changing? So I'll make a plug. Like some of the work that we're doing is looking at home hormone devices. We've used both Anito and Uva, and I found it so helpful. Like we always kind of had to work out the kinks, so I did it on my own first before we have everyone do it. And it's so powerful to be able to see its urine hormones every day and how they line up with blood hormones versus a single point in time, and the variability and how that makes women feel, how it impacts their sleep, and how it impacts metabolism. We're trying to control for all of that. And then we are starting a study, the first with creatine in perimenopause, but more importantly, high intensity resistance training in perimenopause. We'll have kind of a resistance training only group to actually get some data of like what would be an expected lean mass change. Does creatine benefit in any way? More so. So we will start that soon. Research just takes really long time.
Okay, sign us up for the next study.
I do have this dream of doing a virtual study. It's just a little bit bigger lift. So
yeah, well, I've got heck of a lot of women that are ready to sign up.
Absolutely,
we can use. Thank you so much, Abbie, for your time and for who you are in the space and this beautiful voice of reason to just kind of bring everyone has a place at the table.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. Yeah, I feel like so much social media is hard, so I just stay in my little pocket. So thanks for giving us some giving us some light and some real conversations of we're all just doing our best.
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star review and sharing the Body Pod with your friends.
Until next time.